whiskey and that
Yeah,
family.
I saw a black middle class and a high and a class of professionals, a large concentration of black professionals that I'd ever seen. We had a lot of black lawyers, doctors, both male and females. We had they had black law firms here, and they had politicians. And I recall that one of the first or second black congressmen ever in the history of the United States, Charles Diggs, came from Detroit. And at the time, a congressman that I came to Detroit in the 70s, one of the still sitting congressmen, John Conyers, was a congressman at that time. And I saw a kind of a population of middle class to upward blacks, those living out on Outer Drive. They had mansions, large homes. Everybody was driving a new car, and naturally American-made car, big Cadillacs, Fleetwood Bromes, Eldorados that were selling for $26,000 at the time. They had the Lincoln, I think the Lincoln Mark IV came out at that time, big Lincoln. They had big cars, and the community had beautiful homes. Everybody was drinking good whiskey. Everybody was eating good. They were taking trips, and I saw a kind of a black affluence that I had never seen in other cities like Los Angeles, Chicago, and places. They weren't eking out a living. They seemed to have used an old phraseology. They had arrived, reached a point of life where they were comfortable and were doing what they wanted to do in life, having a nice occupation, nice home, and some of the nice things that they desired in life. I saw a significant number of people in the judiciary system, but ironically, I immediately detected that there was something missing here, that there was a tremendous erosion of the political system and erosion of the police department, erosion of the religious system in the city, and that there were a group of people who had migrated from the South to the city who were marginally educated, and many of them were able to get jobs inside of the automotive industry and to do well. They highlighted, the Detroit Free Press highlighted a family that had several sons, and they saved a lot of money, and they pooled their money in. They had savings clubs, and they bought businesses and stuff and property. And then you had the other set that was hell-bent toward lawlessness. They were all relying upon the automotive industry at that time, and the automotive industry and the ancillary industries, the peripheral industries that were associated with it. And a lot of the workers, blue-collar workers, if you use that term, they were earning decent livings. They were getting bonuses, and they were doing well. And another thing that I learned, and it really shocked me, was that this thing called a chop shop. It's where they take steel cars and they cut them up and sell them in parts. Some of the parts are shipped overseas and they're shipped domestically. And I found that to be very different, especially at the core where cars are made. Another thing I saw in driving.
So even at kind of the height of Detroit economically, or almost the height, and the criminal element was seeping into that.
Well, I found Detroit, in Detroit, it had a large black population, and the people in Detroit, many of them were homeowners, and I think at the time it had probably one of the largest black homeowners per capita in the nation. And many of them were, I learned the word blue collar, and then we had the other culture, the highly intelligent professionals, lawyers, doctors, politicians. And, but I also learned that there was drugs all over the location, all over Detroit. And I was introduced to a white informant who worked at Dodge, Maine. And he he wanted to do two guys who were selling heroin and cocaine and stuff over there at Dodge, Maine. And after I met with him and we got our stories in sync, he introduced me to a guy, and I asked him, why did he want to do these guys? And he said something that I found that later came to pass. He indicated that all of the automotive plants are cities within themselves, and that drugs are rampant inside of the plants. Drugs, prostitution, number running, fencing, everything that you can think of existed in the automotive plant. He wanted to immobilize these true dope dealers because he believed that people selling drugs who worked for the automotive industry would cause the complete destruction of the automotive industry. He stated that cars that were assembled on Mondays and Fridays were lemons, that they were no good because of the drug use, people using drugs ready to party for the weekend, and those coming in off of drug use over the weekend on Monday. And when I met with these two gentlemen, I bought dope from both of them, and it was surprised, and they were selling dope over. They were white males selling dope over at Dodge, Maine, as though they had a license. And the ironic part about it was usually when a black person goes to a white person to buy dope, they play the police game. They kind of think that you're the police. But I guess because I was introduced to him by a white male who also worked there, they were less suspicious. But they were white males dealing dope, and they had good positions over it.
What did you buy for that?
About 2 ounces of each, and one had to put quarter ounces, half ounces together in packages of heroin, yes. I could see the seed of destruction, and I knew that from what this white informant told me regarding the automotive industry, I suspected that it would fold or it would decrease in its productivity because he said because of all of the things that were transpiring inside of the industry. And I never suspected that it would get into the robotics where it would eliminate many of those manual labor jobs like the painting and the assembling jobs that hired so many people. I also saw, and I suspected that the educational system was eroding, the school system, politics were eroding, and I saw the religious system going to pot. I saw a police department unquestionably that was behind the times in progressive law enforcement. And I felt that it was there was a lot of corruption and a lot of ineptness in that department. And I started later seeing some of these things come to pass. An example, buying the dope over at Dodge, Maine. When I came back to Detroit, this was in '72. I came back to Detroit in 1979 as a group supervisor. And when I was promoted to Detroit, one of my friends asked me who had I pissed off to get a supervisory position in Detroit.
Punishment.
Right. But when I came back to Detroit, what had transpired, the dope had somewhat, it was still, city was still fraught with heroin and cocaine. But back in '72, I think we put away a large number of those dope dealers. And I think had we not put them away at that time, this city would have been completely destroyed by the dopers and the murders that were taking place. But when I came back in '79, one of the saddest scenes I recall seeing was I had bought dope at Dodge, Maine and Hamtramck, and seeing them close down what they call Dodge, Maine and Hamtramck. And there was a black male in the Detroit Free Press. They showed his picture, and they showed an article saying that he had worked for Dodge for 27 years, and he was crying. He didn't know where he was going to go. And at that time, I saw, and I remember some of the murders that were taking place, and I saw that the erosion of the politics, the erosion of the religion, the erosion of the police department, and I saw people in positions that of authority, in fiduciary positions that were doing things that were causing a complete deterioration of the city. One of the things, an example would be seeing people who had an admiration for the criminal element, admiring crooks, admiring, and I saw not only seeing that, but in the black community, Detroit being predominantly black, some of the things that the young males were seeing, the guys riding around in the fancy cars were the dope dealers, the pimps. And the dope dealers, fancy cars, the fancy jewelry, fancy clothing. They were going to a place called the Pink Lady, the fancy clubs, eating some of the best food and drinking some of the best liquor, and then have a 9 to 5. They didn't have to wake up at 2 o'clock and go into the plant. And they were, then they saw the ministers here making big money in the churches. And the ministers, these churches were, a lot of people were tithing, giving 1/10 of their salary. And the ministers riding around in big rides, tailor-made shoes. They were buying clothing from some place called Cousins. I went over there one time and I decided to splurge and spend $200 on a pair of alligator shoes. And I rolled over there, and I had a green suit at the time, and I wanted to buy these green alligator shoes. And I went over to Cousins, and I walked in. The guy told me, I said, Lisa, these shoes, these are made for you. They're tailor-made for you, and they're on sale today. And I thought, I said, well, I might, if they're $300, I might splurge and buy them. And so when he told me they were $990, they were reduced to $995, I told him my exact words, well, hell, I would put a down payment on a car before I buy it, spend this amount on a pair of shoes. And I heard a phrase that is common today. A guy told me that I was Bamified, which is a phrase meant that I was all country and out of touch with urban